Armstrong. I'm the executive editor of Endpoints News. Thank you all so much for being here for our happy hour. And we are going to be doing something that we have never, well, there we go. We're going to be doing something that we've never done before, which is taking our YouTube show, streaming and podcast, Post-Hoc Live, and doing it live here at JP Morgan. It's going to be broadcasting a little bit later in the week, back on East Coast time, when all of your colleagues who are having restful, calm weeks back at home are at their desks and have a chance to watch. Now, for those of you who don't know the show, Post-Hoc Live is our show that we do where we take you behind the scenes in the newsroom. We have conversations with sources, conversations with our other reporters. We talk about what we think are the most important stories that are going on, give you the reporting, the analysis, and the context that happens. So, thrilled to be doing this here with you in person. I hope you have a drink. For those of you who are up front, please come close, gather around. We're going to have a nice time, so take everybody a few steps forward. I am going to be introducing and interviewing Noubar Afeyan from Flagship Pioneering. He's the CEO and the founder. He is one of the best chats in biotech. We're going to have a ton to talk about with his annual letter. To introduce that conversation, I have Tarek Rabah, the president and CEO of Otsuka North America Pharmaceutical. Through his career, he's held leadership roles with global biopharmaceutical companies on 4 continents, bringing together high-functioning teams that challenge conventional thinking and deliver results in complex business environments. Please, everybody give Tarek a round of applause, a little bit of silence, and then we will be on with our show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Drew. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Obviously, not coming to see me, I know, but it's really nice to see everyone here. I work for Otsuka Pharmaceuticals. We've been in business since 1921. Our mission is really defy limitations so that we can set the examples for others to do that. And to do that, we really need to push the boundaries of science. And we can't do that without partnership and collaboration. That's probably why we are all here during this week. We do focus on 2 main areas, psychiatry and neurology and nephrology, but we are also extremely excited to expand into immunology. We've been accumulating for the last few years and more recently a number of proprietary platforms in immunology, and we think we are a really good place for us to meet so much unmet needs, specifically when it comes to immunological diseases. Saying that, at the end of the day, I think it's extremely important for us to, in order to achieve our objectives, to maintain the environment that really made, this U.S. really the best place for best place for the industry in biopharmaceuticals, and we hope we can keep this ecosystem and this discovery culture that we have. We are extremely excited that probably for the next decade, this will be, for Otsuka, the most transformative period in its history. And the most interesting thing is that it's coming in from innovation that is outside our own labs. So talking about the future, I am extremely honored to actually pass it to Drew for the discussion with Noubar.
Tarek, thank you very, very much. Noubar, please come up, have a seat. I'm delighted to have you on the show. I know you're one of the busiest men at JP Morgan. I feel like I see you on one stage or another running around. We usually do this show from my living room, and so this is a bit strange, but if you can all imagine, we've got the fire in the background and everything like that. We'll do it as best we can here in the basement of the Marriott Marquis. Now, every year you put out this letter where you take stock of where we are in biotech, and this year's letter, I think, was in some ways unusual. It was a warning. You talked about this as being, as this moment that we're in as being at risk of taking a sledgehammer to our miracle machine, calling it, I think, the most dangerous time we've seen in 40 years in this business. I talk to folks in industry, and you're saying the house is on fire, and it feels like there's not enough other people saying the house is on fire when I look at leaders in this industry and somewhere else. Why do you think the industry is not yet speaking out in the terms that you are? I know some people are, but I think, it feels like there is a little bit of a lack of leadership right now.
All right, well, thanks. This is not your living room? Is that what you're saying? Okay, all right. They invited me to his living room. But, well, first, thanks for sticking around. I know this is a very busy time, and you probably have 10 other things you could do. So whatever Drew did to bring you here, I'm happy to participate and contribute to. Look, I don't know that I'd say what I'm saying is the house is on fire, but I think as an industry, we have certain things we take for granted. And one of them is the talent and the underlying scientific advances that allow us to come up with new medicines. And it's so kind of motherhood and apple pie that we just take it for granted, because the government in this country has, for the last 70, 80 years, had this great alliance where they undertook funding basic and applied research in academia. They further put obligations on academic research to be translated and have impact to society, which in our field means new medicines, new tests. And the venture industry and the pharmaceutical industry entirely depends on that oxygen, on that fuel. And what's happening in front of us, if you really stop and think about it, is that the underlying premise that can be counted on is in question. Now, you might say, well, no, it's not, big deal, we've got all these pipelines, etc. But in fact, the science that's being advanced today is the basis for the products 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now. And if we really cut that off and feel like big deal, it's not going to affect me in the next few years, I'm on my job, I'll get promoted, I don't care about it, then we would be acting on our peril. So what I would say is that as an industry, we are the beneficiaries of essentially relatively free access to major scientific advances, because we live in this country and the government has for a long time using a scientific process, a process which kind of forces fact-based arguments, made determinations, not only to fund things, but also what facts are. And so all of that, in my view, has led to our advantage in biotechnology. And I believe that we should spend at least 10% of our time worrying about it. I'm not saying the house is on fire. I'm not saying, oh, investors don't invest in biotech. All that is the rest of your program. But I'm worried about the underlying, I'm saying our foundations are shaking.
I think it's often easy to forget when we look at this incredible system of science that we have here in the US, how new all of it is. In some ways, this is, in many ways a product of a, post-World War II environment. People fled Europe, they came here. I think, and I wanted to ask you this. Your background, you're an immigrant to this country. You were born in Lebanon. Your family left the Civil War there. You're in some ways a very American success story that I think is, I think people sometimes forget what that means, and that this is one of the places where that's possible in the world. Do you see people kind of taking for granted this amazing thing that we have, and forgetting what a kind of new miracle machine it is?
Right. So for those of you who have 10 minutes to waste reading this letter, you'll see the case that I lay out is that you can view biotechnology, not to aggrandize it, as a source of what otherwise people would view as miracles. The notion that you can take a pill every few months and treat completely and restrain HIV or certain forms of cancer or prevent diseases. That in any other time would seem like a miracle. And we go to work every day and perform these man-made or human-made miracles. And kind of it just goes on and on like that, and we kind of feel like, how come it's so expensive? Instead of saying, holy cow, it's a miracle. It's like, I'm saving lives. I think that isn't just kind of a right we have. I think it's the result of the way the system works. And there's two aspects. One is the government funding, etc. That's one thing. The other is that when we discuss what is and isn't objectively a valid medicine, a valid protocol, a mandate or not of how to get vaccinated, how to treat people in different diseases, there is a data-driven debate. And then there's a collective conclusion that is based on data-based argumentation. What I worry about, and again, look, I've done this for 39 years, almost 40 years, and I don't think my history is one of being alarmist. You'd be hard-pressed to do a search and find anything alarmist that I've put out. But maybe it's a sign of getting old. But I find now, left and right, points being made where one side is arguing based on documents, data, facts, debates, and the other side is just saying, well, this is my opinion, and I don't need to come up with facts. That's what I think. And look, people try to pin me down. Well, what specifically do you mean? Just look around at every one of these topics. I don't think there is the same type of data-driven argumentation. And I think we need to, as a scientific community, insist on it, because I say in the letter, and I really believe this, today it could be childhood vaccines, or it could be autism, or it could be mRNA. I think tomorrow it will be many other things. And you asked the question, Drew, I want to just call it out. We're all complicit in this. I think a lot of companies and people go, thank God I'm not working on mRNA. Thank God I'm not working on childhood vaccines. I'm safe. And I'm here to tell you, you're not.
Right. Well, I think one other thing that you mentioned very specifically in your letter is that we're in this very pivotal period right now where there is rising competition around the world. You talk a lot about China. And I want to get your perspective on what I think is a really interesting debate, and I see it amongst a lot of VCs, where there's the argument of let's put up barriers, let's make it harder to access innovation from China, let's make it more expensive, we need to protect U.S. biotech ecosystem and VC ecosystem. When you hear that argument, what do you think about that?
I don't make that argument in my letter. What I do is to lay out the fact that I think that competition is generally a good thing, provided it's done on a fair basis. And I think that this industry is collaborating a lot with China in the research side, in licensing assets, but we need to make sure that the result of that is fair competition. So if on the one hand you can generate data there that gets human data in a fraction of the time, fraction of the cost, because it's permitted, and that on the benefit of that, you will displace assets being developed here from a deal-making standpoint, I don't think that's fair competition. One way or the other, you have to figure out either in the US, they have to kind of create a level playing field, or they have to create some way for the industry to compete. By the way, if anybody thinks that the US economic policy has not protected in many ways research in biotech, let alone semiconductors, it has for a long time. I think some of those protections seem to be going away, and I do think this. So I'm not an advocate of restricting investment into China. I think there should be conditions. We should also think, obviously the Senate has a group looking at security implications. We should just make sure it's done in a fair and safe way, and then after that, welcome the competition.
Yeah. Well, can I ask you? I mean, on the competitive standpoint, we had Bob Nelson at our event earlier today. Bob is always outspoken, always provides a quote, and one of the things he said was that on Christmas Day he was on calls, business calls, with a bunch of the AI companies that he's working with, and he said he wasn't on the phone with any of the biotech companies that he's working with, and I think the quote he said, "We're trying to cure cancer. We don't want people who want to go mountain biking at 4:30 in the afternoon. The level of intensity we can learn from China, and we can learn from AI." You're a fixture in Boston, you're a fixture in this industry, you work with a ton of different companies. If this is something where the US needs to be competitive and competitive on a fair basis, are we at risk of losing a step when we think about global competition, how hard people are working, and who really wants this more?
I have not witnessed in the biotech industry a kind of a laissez-faire, relaxed atmosphere. We come from a period over the last 5 years where the conditions have been damn near mortal. Yeah. And I don't know why Bob thinks that people are taking it easy. Maybe in the last few months, 3 or 4 large acquisitions later, the investors are taking it easy. I don't know. But I don't know anybody in biotech companies that are taking it easy. I think they're mortified at the prospect of raising money and advancing their programs. And so I think the competitive pressure exists in the US. The competitive pressure is looming and larger from China. And like I said, I'm not arguing for less competition. I'm arguing for an even playing field. Yeah. But also I want to point out that what the Chinese are investing money in is the scientific method in deciding what is and isn't objectively true. And I think that if we lose that, we create this disadvantage where they'll be more right than we are.
Yeah. You mentioned one other thing in your letter that I wanted to get into. You talked about the rebound that we're in right now, and you also mentioned the possibility of overdoing it in some areas. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that and where maybe, it has been kind of an incredible recovery a little bit over the last few months, obviously a long way to go. Do you see over-exuberance in any areas or people getting a little bit ahead of themselves in some spots?
I don't tend to traffic in the kind of, over-exuberance or those kinds of things. And let me tell you why, Drew.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, I have a similar thinking that I'll just use by analogy. In the regular industries and let alone big companies, one of the go-to moves is under-promise and over-deliver.
Right.
That's the people who get promoted. Mm-hmm. In our field, when there's so much uncertainty, I think that's a fool's errand. You can't under-promise because you have no idea what's going to work, and you can't over-deliver because you have no idea what's going to work. And so you should just promise and deliver and make sure the other side knows about the uncertainty. Similarly, in this case, I don't know what's over-exuberance, under-exuberance. These are people who are like pundits. The people who are in the game basically do everything they can to survive. Sometimes they get lucky enough to thrive. Then they start altering or worshiping at the altar of chance because their number was called. But none of that is to do with exuberance. So, do I think an entrepreneur down the corridor from here who describes how their next oligo attached to an LMP, attached to an antibody is going to do this, that's over exuberance? No, it's not. It's the hope that drives the resources, that drives the hard work, that assuming we stick to a scientific approach will give us results that once in a while will become medicines. That's the industry we're in, and I really don't want to engage in saying it's getting over-exuberant, under-exuberant. Just, pause it, prove, move on. That's what you do in science, that's what you do in companies.
I want to ask you a very flagship-specific question. I think you guys have a reputation for doing a lot of platform companies, taking really big swings on technologies. We've seen a little bit of a less enthusiasm for those kind of big platform solutions, I think, coming out of some of the challenges with gene editing and things like that. How are you thinking about the future of what you all want to invest in, the ideas that you're most excited about at a conceptual level?
So is this like a roundabout way of saying that others who just invest in assets are being over-exuberant? Yeah. Because I probably would agree with the over-exuberance of people who just bet on assets. And jokingly, I'll tell you why. It's these assets that are slightly better than current assets that China is flooding the market with. Yeah. Good luck with that. Good luck. If there was 100 lottery tickets from which you were going to win with one, now there's 10,000. Yeah. So, that your odds just got lower. I would say this, we're known for creating multi-product engines. That's what people call platforms. A multi-product engine at the end of the day creates products. Our products, though, are new enough that just one of them, like going to Mars and coming back with one little piece of Mars, sounds crazy. At least you want to bring back 4 or 5 things. Yeah. Because one of them might tell you there's life. I just feel like the diversification that you need to do when you're doing things for the first time is a function of the uncertainty that you're prosecuting. So therefore, in an environment like this where capital has been somewhat constrained, it's changing a little bit, you've got to figure out how to create optionality. That's not a choice between platforms and products. Every one of our companies that has gone public or has been sold is essentially a product engine which has products. It's just that we don't try to look at an engine and go, that's great, mildly interesting, now let me just take a shot glass and that's all I get from it. That's not what we believe long-term can work. We're not criticizing other approaches. We think it takes a multitude of approaches. By the way, for those of you who interact with Flagship, we have now a team called Pioneering Medicines. It's 150 preclinical and early clinical development people centrally, and they're developing 22 molecules over and above what our companies are developing. Yeah. So I think centrally, we probably have more drugs being developed at Flagship than any other venture, studio, company, innovator. But we don't talk about it because we think that's just kind of a matter of course way of pulling on our platforms. The key is the platform innovation and how can you make it get to a certain threshold.
Well, can I go back to one of your comments there? I mean, these asset-focused companies, and are they at risk of, in the environment where we're in, where if you have an idea out there, it can be very quickly replicated, me too'd, me bettered? Do you put yourself at risk of being commoditized if you're kind of a single asset company rather than putting your risk on a platform technology?
You don't have to listen to me. You can just have to follow the field. I think Endpoints will do an article, if it's not within a month, then 3 months, and just show the data. The reality is you're defenseless. Like, look, this industry, when it's cash constrained, investors cause entrepreneurs to bet on one thing. It's like a roulette table. You get to pick, you don't even pick evens and odds, you red, black, you just pick one number. And if your number is called, you go home rich.
Right.
If your number is not called, then you kind of feel like, why exactly did I show up and play this game? But then you go, maybe tomorrow I'll win again. Sorry for explaining it this way. This is not a new thought. I've believed this for a long time. There is an element of what we do that is unpredictable and therefore chance-oriented, and you need to be diversified. Guess what, folks? Investors are diversified. Entrepreneurs are forbidden from you to be diversified because you're supposed to put all your eggs in one basket. So yeah, if I'm an entrepreneur in this field, what advice do I have at the advanced age I'm in now? I've been doing this, as I said, for 39 years. Absolutely refuse to be pigeonholed into one asset. How do you do that? Partnerships. If you can't afford developing another asset, this industry has moved away, and it's coming back now, from partnerships that in the beginnings of this industry, companies like Genentech, Amgen, Biogen, Genzyme, Millennium, Regeneron, Alnylam, Moderna, every one of them was built on partnerships, not on their lead asset for the first 10, 15 years. Now you come to meetings and everybody goes, don't license your first program, otherwise nobody's going to give you money. That may be true, but then you become a lottery ticket.
You've been doing this, you said, for 30
You wanted controversy, right?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I knew we'd get there eventually. You've been doing this. Let me wrap up with you here with one question. I mean, you've been doing this for 39 years. How many years have you been writing your letter? You've been doing it for...
Sorry?
How many years have you been writing the letter?
I think 4 or 5 years, something like that. You guys will know. 4 years, 5 years? Not that long.
I mean,
I've done other types of things like that, but this letter 4 years.
When you think about what you want your legacy to be, in however far in the future that is, what's the most important thing that Flagship can do and that you can lead them to over the next several years?
I wouldn't call it a legacy because that's a personal thing, but what we're trying to leave behind is an institutional way to conceive and create companies, which in my belief is the most valuable way to convert science into impact and products. So an institutional way to do what we call entrepreneuring, an institutional way to make breakthrough innovations, which we practice, and even more interesting to me is to operate as an ecosystem of companies that are interrelated and across which there's a collective knowledge and resource base that can match a large company. Because our little companies are all subcritical mass. They talk to the FDA once every 2 years, or maybe a year. We talk to the FDA every week across one or another of our companies. If they operate as an ecosystem, as they do, if they share expertise, if they need to know somebody who's a real specialist in this assay and they can get access. So I'd say entrepreneuring, pioneering, ecosystem-ing at an institutional level, that's a long answer. But we're trying to make this activity a professional, repeatable activity. And I've dedicated the last 25 years of my career to this. I'll dedicate as much more as I have. The good news is Flagship has about 600 people that are practicing this form of value creation. It's not easy. It's not kind of glamorous. We're not out, making announcements on a lot of things. But we're trying to learn how to do this better and better. And by the way, I'll say, I'm very encouraged, over-exuberant, on AI and its impact on this type of activity. If you want to practice artisanal drug discovery and drug development, you don't need AI. I agree with the critics. If you want to do things in an industrial, repeatable way across hundreds of different prospective drugs and get to something and increase POS, reduce the time, all these things that you go, oh, you guys are making promises, it's never going to happen. If we don't make the promise, it's never going to happen. And so I believe that this type of organized... Look, I just interviewed Patrick Collison. I don't know if you know him. He's the founder, CEO of Stripe. And we had him, you may know, he started the ARC Institute. It's a 300-person organization spending a ton of money funding biological research. He's a tech guy. He's an AI guy. He can't figure out how this industry works. He can't figure out why people wait around for 10, 15 years just to do something. So I think the more this field becomes a tech, AI, information science field, the more what we're trying to do will make sense. And that's my hope.
Well, I hope we can have you back on the show. We'll do it the normal way next time we do it. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for joining Endpoint's Post-Hoc Live. For everybody here, please give Noubar an enormous round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. We're going to let the happy hour roll a little bit longer here. Please grab a drink, circulate, say hi to our team, and thank you so much for all of you who joined us earlier today in our main event, and we'll see you soon.